Hello class and welcome back. I'm Professor G and I want to take a few minutes to talk about Galileo Galilei. Now Galileo is a 17th century Italian astronomer, mathematician, physicist, really a polymath. Polymath is a person that's good at a lot of different disciplines. So what I want you to read is I'm going to have you guys read Galileo's letter to the Grand Duchess Christina. Letter to the Grand Duchess Christina. And this letter is going to center around a debate that starts to emerge in the 17th century over the relationship between Copernicus's heliocentric theory, his heliocentric model of the universe that I talked about in the last video. So a debate between Copernicus and the interpretation of the biblical text. Now this starts off not really as a matter of religious debate, but it actually starts off as a scientific debate. And it starts off after Copernicus published his work, On the Revolution of the Heavenly Spheres. When he published this work, a mathematician named Rheticus added a foreword to his book. And in this foreword, unbeknownst to Copernicus, Rheticus slipped in this foreword, and this foreword said that Copernicus's theories were nothing more than mathematical speculation. That the algorithms published in Copernicus's book just represented Copernicus trying to figure out how the universe operated. Mathematically speaking. Again, this gets to this whole math debate that we talked about in the last video. And so Rheticus says that Copernicus's ideas are nothing more than that they're nothing more than mathematics. And that you shouldn't interpret Copernicus to be saying something about physical reality. Now, Galileo comes along and he says, no. Copernicus is not only providing these mathematical proofs, but these mathematical proofs describe reality. So first of all, Galileo is in an argument not with religious clergy, but with mathematicians and with astronomers. And the debate is over this idea of scientific realism or mathematical realism. The debate is over whether or not these proofs actually describe reality, or if our observations have to back up these proofs. Galileo says, no, these proofs describe reality. And Galileo is the one who starts to develop the tools and the technology needed, namely the telescope, to provide observation to back up Copernicus. Okay, but Galileo is a firm believer that mathematics describes reality. Now, so at first he's in debate with these scientists. But this raises a whole nother question. Okay? The other question that it raises is the relationship between theology and science. Now, traditionally speaking, before Copernicus, you have several different views of theology and science, but for the most part, theology and science were pretty close together. And people didn't really question this dichotomy. You don't really see ancient people dissecting whether or not the Bible describes reality like we do in the Enlightenment era and like we do today. Now there are some examples, don't get me wrong, there are some ancient examples, but for the most part, there's not this question that develops. And this question being, does theology describe reality? Physical reality? Or more specifically, does the Bible describe physical reality? Do the events described, for example, in Genesis, where you have the creation of the world, are those events, is it really talking about how reality was actually created? Is Genesis literally describing the creation of the earth? Or should it be interpreted more symbolically? These are the questions that start to get asked beginning in the scientific revolution. And Galileo is kind of at the forefront of these questions. Now, medieval theologians and medieval thinkers didn't have to worry about this because in the medieval era you have the two books hypothesis. The two books hypothesis, developed by thinkers such as Thomas Aquinas. Aquinas says you have two books. The book of salvation, which is the Bible, right? The Bible's primary purpose is to teach you how to be saved. The book of salvation, and on the other hand, the book of nature. Both books ought to be read, but both books are describing two different things. Okay, the Bible is teaching us about salvation, what we need to do in order to be saved. Nature is teaching us about God's works, about creation, right? And for the medievals, there wasn't really a whole lot of conflict there. Now there was when you started dealing with issues about, for example, whether or not the universe was eternal, but this was a more academic type debate. So with Galileo you get to some more practical problems. Okay, there's a few issues that kind of rear their head in which is going to bring this debate to the forefront. Specifically speaking, what a lot of people like to point to was a selection from the book of Joshua, in which Joshua, who is a king of Israel, is fighting, and it's starting to get nighttime. Joshua needs some more time in the day to continue fighting because he doesn't want to fight at night. And so he prays to God, and God makes the sun stand still to give him more time to fight. So what does that matter? Well, if Copernicus is right, God wouldn't have made the sun stand still, he would have made the earth stand still. Because it's the earth that's moving, not the sun. So the question then becomes, well, is the Bible right because it clearly says God made the sun stand still? Or is Copernicus right? And if so, what does that mean? Does it mean that the Bible's wrong? Does it mean that we are somehow misinterpreting something here? And what Galileo is going to take a very, I don't want to say traditional, but Galileo, when you read the letter to the Duchess Christina, he's not really saying anything new. In fact, this is an argument that goes all the way back to St. Augustine in the 4th century AD, about 700 years prior to Galileo. But nevertheless, what Augustine said, Augustine said that the Bible ought to never contradict common sense reality, right? The Bible, your belief about the Bible should never bump up against your common everyday beliefs, right? If the Bible tells you that you're really just some kind of soul floating around in heaven and that you're only like perceiving earth because God's making you perceive earth, Augustine would say, well, that's just kind of weird, and you shouldn't do that with the Bible. Okay? And more importantly, Augustine says, if the Bible does contradict common sense, then it's not the Bible that is wrong, rather it is your interpretation of the Bible. And this is kind of the approach that Galileo takes with some new ideas sprinkled in there. Galileo says, yeah, the book of Joshua does say that, but we know that Copernicus is right. We know this. And so rather than change what we know for certain with mathematics, maybe it's our interpretation that is incorrect. Maybe God was speaking to this people in a way that they would understand. Okay? The ancient Israelites had no idea about Copernican astronomy because they lived like 2,000 years prior to Copernicus, so how could they know? That Galileo says it wouldn't really make much sense for God to lay out Copernican astronomy for these people. Right? So maybe, and this is called accommodation, that the Bible speaks to people in a way that people understand, even if that understanding conflicts with what we know today. So this is basically the line of attack that that Galileo takes. But not everybody's on board. And not everybody thinks that this is an appropriate argument. Because what it means is that we're going to have to take a more symbolic approach to the interpretation of Scripture. And some people weren't that comfortable with that. So, read the letter to the Grand Duchess. Tell me what you think.